Okay guys, here we've got a quick video for you, essentially going to be detailing how to put on some of the key components onto your motherboard. So this is going to be in specific reference to our Z77-V Pro board, and it's going to be covering things like the installation of our Wi-Fi Go module, memory, CPU cooler, and the CPU itself. Okay, so let's first start off with how you want to have things set up. And that's going to be essentially just clearing a flat area, like a table, and from there taking the actual motherboard box and laying it flat. So let's take a look here at how we have it set up. So you can see here we've got our P8 Z77-V Pro board. It's essentially just set right on top of the motherboard box. This will work as a great place to go ahead and get things installed. And the first thing that we're going to go ahead and actually install is going to be our little Wi-Fi Go module. And the Wi-Fi Go module itself is what's going to go ahead and give us wireless connectivity on the motherboard. And we're going to install this first for the main reason being is that once you install the motherboard inside of the chassis, if you fail to put this on there, you'd be stuck and you'd actually have to take the entire motherboard out to be able to install this module. With other items like your CPU or your memory, you could still put those in even after the fact, although ideally you want to install them outside of the chassis just for the most flexibility. So let's go ahead and get this process started. I'm just going to go ahead and unscrew this screw right here. Just going to set it right here to the side. We're going to go ahead and align these, essentially this pad here with the pins that we have on the board. And from here, I'm just going to go ahead and set her in. Okay, once it's gone ahead and set in there, you want to go ahead and take that screw, screw it into the back plane, and I'll show you in a moment here what that looks like for you guys. Okay, and that's it. We've now successfully installed our Wi-Fi Go module. We're going to show you something really important in the process of setting up and building your PC, and that's going to be a process for updating the UEFI, or what's sometimes referred to as the BIOS. We've got a really easy way to do that with what's called USB BIOS flashback. All you're going to need is your motherboard, a power supply, and a USB flash drive. So all you're going to have to do from there is go to support.asus.com, download the file, transfer it over to your flash drive. Just make sure to have it in the root folder, renamed to the actual compatible format. And from there, we're going to connect it to the USB port. So let's go ahead and show that. So here, I'm just going to take the flash drive. I'm going to go ahead and plug it into the USB port, specifically that port right there. That is the designated USB BIOS flashback port. Okay. And from there, I'm just going to move over and move over to the USB BIOS flashback button. At that point, all I'm going to need to do is hold down this button for about 3 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, and you'll see that that button begins to blink. Now, we have already gone ahead and updated this motherboard to the latest version, so the actual blinking completed pretty quickly. Now, your motherboard will most likely have an older UEFI as opposed to the one you downloaded. So the process will take somewhere between about maybe a minute to about a minute and a half. But it will continually blink, and once it's stopped blinking, you've successfully updated your UEFI. In the event that it does have the same exact version, you're going to see the same blinking sequence that we saw, which essentially only lasted for a couple of seconds. So that's all that's required in terms of USB BIOS flashback. Okay guys, at this point we're going to go ahead and show you how to go ahead and successfully install a 1155 CPU into a Z77 series motherboard. So this is going to be pretty straightforward, but there are a couple little steps to it that you do want to keep in mind. So first and foremost, of course, we've got our CPU right here. We're just going to go ahead and set that right here to the left-hand side. We're going to be set. Now, this is the area that, of course, we're interested in. This is the actual retention plate here, the lever that goes ahead and locks the retention plate in, and here we actually have the socket cover. So first, what we want to go ahead and do is depress down on this lever, okay, and then we want it swing out. So as you can see right there, there's a motion that if I go ahead and press that down and swing out, that essentially allows me to go ahead and work with that lever, okay? So we're going to go ahead and press that down, swing out, and then it lifts up. That's all based off of the tension that's already in play. So from there, very straightforward, we're just going to go ahead and lift this up. So we go ahead and lift this up, we're just going to go ahead and peel back and pop that guy off. Do not throw this away. You want to make sure and always keep this. Ideally, I recommend putting it back inside the motherboard box. This is just going to be in the event that maybe if you ever have to return your motherboard or RMA for any purposes, you always want to protect the socket from potentially being damaged. Okay? Now here you can see we have the exposed CPU socket. Now if you'll see here closely, there are some notches within the CPU socket area. Okay? Those notches will align with the actual CPU itself. So it's kind of like a set of Legos in terms that you can kind of only notch them in a certain way. So you want to pay attention to that. So once again, if you take a look right here, there's a notch, and here there's another. And if we go ahead and we take a look at the CPU itself, it will mirror the same pattern. So you can see right there, there's the notch, and there's the notch. So at that point, we know where to successfully install our CPU. So I'm going to go ahead and hold it on the side like this. I generally don't advise holding it horizontally. Hold it vertically. And we're just going to go ahead and set it down. And that's it. And the main reason being that I went ahead and held it vertically, so underneath the CPU and at the top of the CPU, is if you look essentially in this area, there's a little bit of an exposed lip. And that essentially is a kind of a recessed area to allow your fingers to essentially have a little bit of movement in play as you go ahead and bring that CPU down. Same way that if you want to go ahead and lift up, it gives you a little bit of play so that you can come down and then go ahead and clip onto it and then bring it out. Okay? You'll sometimes find out that there are in some stores devices like our CPU chip removers or installers where they're kind of like tweezers. I generally don't actually advise these because just if you're not holding it exactly perfectly right, it's very easy to drop the CPU. I find that the overall tensile strength that you have within your fingertips is better at being able to keep it held in place. So at this point, all we're going to do is just bring this guy down. So retention plate, you'll see that of course there's a little bit of slack in terms of here and here. So that's going to go ahead and be adjusted for once we go ahead and bring this retention lever down. So as you see right there, there's a motion that's occurring. It's coming in, coming out. All we got to do is now we're just going to take our thumb, hold the box, press down. You are going to feel resistance. This is okay. You might even hear a small sound in terms of actually the pins and the pad making a slight kind of compression sound effect. That's also okay. Nothing is being damaged. This is just the resistance kind of being equalized. And at that point, we're pulling out. So push down, pulling out, and then letting in. And at that point, we've gone ahead and successfully installed our CPU. So next up, let's go ahead and put the actual CPU cooler. We're going to be talking a little bit right now about some of the considerations you have to have when you're actually installing a CPU cooler. Some of the considerations that come into thermal compound, whether or not you should clean it off, apply your own, and some of the other aspects that you have relative to taking the process of installing the CPU onto the board and then mounting your heatsink assembly or your cooling solution onto the board. So with that, let's take a look at some of the things that I have here on the table that we're going to be covering. All right, so right here we've got our reference Intel heatsink. This is what generally comes with your CPU when you purchase a retail kit. This, for all intents and purposes, is going to take care of the job. It's not going to really have any issues. It's actually a pretty quiet solution. It's pretty efficient. And it will even allow for some very moderate overclocking, generally somewhere within the range of about 4 to about 4.3 gigahertz. Now, all of the retail coolers will come pre-applied with the thermal compound already on them. So that means that you don't have to do anything. All you're going to need to do is essentially just take this out of the box, mount it onto the CPU, and then essentially push down on these pins and fit it onto the motherboard. And we're going to show you how to do that very shortly. But essentially a very simple process. Now there's always a lot of questions. Sometimes people say, well, what's the overall quality of the thermal compound material and whether or not I should replace it with, let's say, something like one of these, an aftermarket thermal compound. You know, this one's got diamond material. This has a diamond mix with like silver materials. There's different things like that. One very important thing is that all the rated specifications of the coolers that you purchase are used with, they're produced in terms of those numbers by the actual vendor. So take for instance, Intel is validated this thermal compound material with this cooler ready to give an XY result. Take for instance here we have an actual closed loop water cooling solution from Corsair. This is an H60 unit and this actually also comes pre-applied with its own thermal compound. We've used it quite a number of times, so we've gone ahead and wiped it clean. It doesn't have anything on it, but the reported temperature performance is going to have been with the thermal compound that's already pre-applied. Now if you do want to go ahead and apply your own additional compound, it's not too much of a process. It's pretty straightforward. You're just going to need something like a paper towel. You might possibly some Q-tips if it gets into little certain crevices. I generally recommend, as far as a basic cleaning solution, high grade alcohol here. This is 99%. If you stopped generally any kind of computer retailer, they generally will have these high-grade type alcohol types. Generally, you want to use at least 92% and above. Now, if you go to a computer hobbyist store of some type or online, you can get actually specially designed thermal compound removers and purifiers. These work very well, but the reality is that they're going to be a little bit expensive. They are going to give you great results in terms of cleaning everything, giving you a really good contact between the thermal compound, the base of the actual cooling plate, and then your CPU, but it is something that's going to be a little bit more process involved in terms of getting that applied over. One last note that you want to make is that with any of these kind of, let's say, non-reference aftermarket thermal compounds, a lot of them can contain silver or other conductive elements. So you need to be very careful to not over-apply and have it run onto either the motherboard or to the CPU socket where it could cause damage. There are other thermal compound materials that have different types of materials that they're comprised of, like a ceramic, that actually will not be conductive. And so if you're a little bit scared about that, that is an option for you. So overall, that gives you a little bit of perspective regarding some of the considerations about thermal compound and applying it and things along those lines. But from here, we're going to make things pretty easy and just use the Intel Retail heatsink. Okay guys, we're just going to show you quickly how to install an Intel Retail heatsink, or what's sometimes referred to as a push pin type fan solution, onto a motherboard. So you will need an actual slotted flathead screwdriver, possibly. And in some situations, if you've got really good finger tension, you won't need it. So let's take a look at what we have here on our table. Okay, so here we've got the actual Intel Retail heatsink. Okay, it's very straightforward. Okay, we've got 4 push pins. Now each one of these push pins can actually rotate, you see? Now depending on its position, it will either allow it to be open or locked into place. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this for you so you just have a little bit of an understanding of it. So as you can see right here, if I go ahead and rotate it and then push up, it's still open, even if I push up. Essentially that means that it's still in an open position, okay? If I go ahead and turn it the other way, which you can see then there, it's now locking into place. When I push up, it will have locked it, and you heard that snap, okay? So when we're going to set this down, we want to actually have all the push pins be in a locked position, because what we want to occur is then when we go ahead and push them down, we want them to be locked. We don't want them to be able to essentially be moved. So I'm going to go ahead and reopen this back up, pull out, and then turn. Now it is in a locked position, okay? Now the reason why I asked, why I noted you might need a flathead is that if you see right here on the top, there is a notching pattern on top of these push pins, so that if you can't do this easily with your thumbs, you could go ahead and just slide it right in there and turn like that. So a couple of considerations is, keep in mind that you can go ahead and run this cable here around the actual fan for a little bit more tidy cable management, and try to keep it in proximity to where the actual CPU fan header is. So let me go ahead and slide this down for you guys here. You can see right here, we have the actual CPU fan headers. One is for CPU fan primary and the other one is for CPU fan optional if we had a fan assembly that had actually support for 2 fans. But our retail solution just has 1 single fan. So I'm just going to go ahead and slightly rotate that there to the side. You'll see that there's 4 holes to mount in. So I'm just going to go ahead and set that on each one of those holes. You'll kind of feel it lightly be in place, okay? But it won't really move too much. We're going to go ahead and, very important, take this header and make the connection right now at this point so that you don't go ahead and forget it, okay? And at that point, from here, all we're going to do is just take your thumb and hold this down and press. You're going to hear an actual lock, and go to the opposite side, do it again, the other side, and then lastly, one more time. At that point, if you want to double check your work, let's go ahead and flip over the motherboard. And you'll actually see that the push pins are now clearly pushed through the entire board, essentially locking it into place.